So as I was saying that today we are going to start with modern Indian history. The first topic that we have to cover is the advent of Europeans. On your screen, you can see the different topics, different sub-themes that we have to cover within this topic. These are the factors for the arrival of the Europeans. That means what was the reason which spurred them or motivated them to come to India from the end of the 15th century towards the 17th century onwards. Then we have to see the order of their arrival. That means who arrived in India in what order, what was the year of their arrival, where was the place that they made landfall, what was the first factory that they established in India, right? Then after this, we are going to look at the Portuguese and their entire experience in India. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to arrive in India, and for about 100 years, they maintained their dominance over the Indian Ocean trade. So we are going to see what are the imperial policies, the economic policies, the religious policies, social policies, etc., that they adopted, and what was their impact. Then you will find that they also struggled during the 16th century with the Arabs who had been dominating Indian Ocean trade before this, right? So we are going to look at the outcome of that. After that, we are going to look at 17th century tripartite struggle between the Portuguese, Dutch, and the British. So after the 16th century Arab-Portuguese struggle, the Portuguese had emerged victorious and they had dislodged the Arabs from the Indian Ocean trade. But from the 17th century onwards, other more powerful European powers became interested in the Indian Ocean trade, such as the Dutch and the British. So during the 17th century, there was a triangular conflict which went on for about 60 or 70 years. And then we'll look at the results for that. Now we know that the Portuguese did not succeed in creating an empire in India, even though they had an early advantage in that they arrived in India earliest, and for about 100 years they were left to their own devices. There was no other Indian or European power to let's say challenge them in India. But in spite of this, they could not establish their empire in India. So we are going to look at the reasons for them for that. And during their time in India, they left an indelible impact on Indian history and culture. So we are going to look at the Portuguese contribution on Indian history and culture. But before we do that, some main questions I'm going to dictate to you. And I hope all of you are sitting with your pens and your notebooks so that you can take these down, right? So question number one is, throw light, throw light on the socio-economic and political factors which led to the arrival of Europeans in India. 250 words. Right. So for those of you who are not aware with the present main scheme for GS paper 1, what the UPSC is doing is that it is dividing the paper into two different sections, section 1, section 2. In section 1, you are going to be asked 10 markers, right? And the word limit for that is going to be 150 words. In section 2, you are going to be asked 15 markers and the word limit is going to be 250 words. So that is the scheme that we are going to stick to. However, there are a few questions which I'm going to set the word limit for as 200 words, because you never know, the UPSC might change this answer scheme. So you should be familiar with the skill of writing answers of all word limits. The keyword over here is precision and exactness. That is what you're going to be judged upon. How faithful you can remain to the central theme of the question. That is what is most important. And from the first day onwards, I want to instill in you the quality of good answer writing and the skill of good answer writing, right? So what we are going to do is, for the initial few classes, I'm going to be discussing these questions with you in detail. See, now if you look at this question, you will find that this question is based on this topic, factors for the arrival of Europeans in India, right? But as we move on to our subsequent classes, there are going to be a few questions which you will not find directly in the notes, but which are going to be implied from the knowledge that you gather. So as we go on in time, your skill level is also going to increase. Okay, right. So this was question number 1. Let's write question number 2. Why did the Portuguese fail to create an empire in India despite having an early advantage? Question mark. 250 words. So this question is about the reasons for the failure of the Portuguese. All right. And the last question for this topic, you can take down. Question 3, examine the Portuguese impact on Indian history and culture. Word limit is 150 words. Okay. So these are the 3 questions for this first topic that we have to cover. Now let's dive right into the subtopics or sub themes that we have to see. The first topic that you have to cover is the factor for the arrival of Europeans. So in your notebook, you can give this heading and then we'll discuss this topic in detail. So most historians say that the Europeans first started arriving in India because of 3 motivating factors. What are these 3 motivating factors? These are known as the 3 G's, right? That is gold, God, and glory. Okay. So gold, God, and glory. Most of these are self-explanatory. Gold का मतलब they came in India to earn wealth from the Indian Ocean trade, and they had also learnt about the fabulous wealth of India from the stories related to them by the European travelers and the Arab merchants who they were in constant contact with. God means the spread of Christianity, right? So they came to India with a religious zeal to expand the scope of Christendom. And glory means you will find that during the medieval ages or at the end of the medieval age, the entire Christian world was in kind of a crisis because of a cataclysmic event, and that was the fall of Constantinople and destruction of the Byzantine Empire. So this perceived loss of glory was a shock to the entire Christian world, and they were trying to reclaim this lost glory. So they came to India not only to conduct trade and to spread Christianity, but also to assert their political dominance over some parts of India and the Indian Ocean. Right. So these are the basic motivating factors. But आपके पास एक question है, right? The first question throw light on the socio-economic and political factors which led to the arrival of Europeans in India. And this explanation simply is not going to suffice. आपको कुछ और detailed explanations देने पड़ेंगे. So let us look at what were these socio-economic and political factors. Right. So one of the major factors which facilitated the exploration of Europeans to discover new lands was the Renaissance. Renaissance. This is a French word which means rebirth or reawakening. Right. So what is the import of this word? This means that something which was once alive and had died in the past has now been rekindled. It has been born again. It has been woken up from its slumber. So what exactly are we talking about over here? This idea of Renaissance was given by modern historians to the phase of European history from the 14th to the 16th century. Right. Now, you have to be aware about what was happening in Europe before this. From the 7th to the 14th century, the European history is known as the Middle Ages, also known as the Dark Age of European history. What are the characteristic features of a dark age? This means that the circulation of knowledge, trade, commerce, technology, etc., had stagnated. Social mobility was very low. Physical mobility was even lower. Inequality was very high. There were stark differences between the landowners and those who cultivated the land. So in Europe, the system which prevailed during this time was known as feudalism. I'm talking about the Dark Ages. Feudalism is a system where the central authority of the monarch is very weak, and there emerge a large number of feudal lords who are large landowners. They not only have titular privileges to their land, but they also enjoy some political powers and privileges, such as they collect taxes from their lands, they maintain armies, and in some cases, they even had the right to make war against other feudal lords or against neighboring kingdoms. Or further, some of them even had the right to issue currency. In this scenario, the daily life of the people was very unstable. Now, because of the existence of these feudal lords, who were many in number and quite powerful, there were internecine wars. That means there were frequent wars, not only among the feudal lords, but also feudal lords of different kingdoms, right? Further, because of the weak position of the king, his position was also challenged by these feudal lords. They could form alliances and overthrow the king. And in this scenario, the conduct of trade and commerce was very difficult, because for trade and commerce, the first thing that you need is stability and political, let's say, stability and peace. That is what you require. Trade and commerce cannot take place without these things, right? So from the 7th to the 14th century, in all spheres of cultural, scientific, and educational life, the people of Europe had been suffering. They had been stagnated. Now, what was the process which allowed this renaissance or rebirth to take place? That was because the Italians took the first step towards looking outwards. You might have heard about Italian cities such as Florence, Venice, Rome, Turin, etc. So these were very ancient and very well developed trading communities. Their trade reached different parts of the world, but they were not reaching these different parts of the world directly. The trade of the world was being conducted by the Arabs. The Arabs had been interlocutors between the different cultures. They traded not only with the Europeans, but also with the other classical civilizations, such as, let's say, Persia, India, China, the Arab world, Egypt, etc. So all the knowledge that they gathered, they took down and they translated it into Arabic. So the period which you categorize as the dark age of European history is known as the golden age of Islam, from the 9th to the 13th century. So this was a period where cultural awakening had taken place in the Arab world. And they had learned not only from the Indians, the Chinese, and the Persians, but they had also recorded the ancient lost knowledge of the European classical civilizations such as Greece and Rome. And the contact from the 14th century onwards with the Italians brought them in contact with this lost knowledge of the ancient classical civilizations. And this process of relearning gave birth to the process of Renaissance. Am I making myself clear? Right. So this Renaissance, what was the outcome of Renaissance? Let us see. Now, as you have seen that a number of scientific discoveries were made, right? The impact of these scientific discoveries was felt most starkly in a few fields, such namely shipbuilding and agriculture, right? So the shipping industry grew quite quickly, and agricultural production in Europe also grew quite a lot from the 14th century onwards. Along with the growth of agriculture, meat supply also increased because the livestock and livestock management and husbandry industries also benefited from the scientific discoveries during the Renaissance. So meat supply also increased. All right. Because of the growth of agricultural production, prosperity grew. So prosperity increased and people had more disposable income, right? And because they had more disposable income, the demand for luxury goods increased. And these luxury goods always came from the East. So the demand for Oriental luxury skyrocketed in Europe as a result of Renaissance. Is this clear? Because of the increase of meat supply, the demand for Indian spices also increased. Why? Because back then there were no refrigerators, and during the winter season, meat needed to be preserved, right? Unlike India, Europe does not have multiple growing seasons. During the summer, they grow, and during the harvest season, they reap all their crops and store it for winter. The livestock also cannot survive in the harsh winter. So at the end of fall, it is always slaughtered. And the European farmers always look for ways to preserve this meat so that it can last them throughout the winter. One way of doing it is to salt it and spice it, right? Because that removes the excess moisture from the tissue through the process of reverse osmosis. And because of this, because of the increase of meat supply, the demand for preservatives grew. And that was the spices, which invariably came from the East. So demand for spices also increased, right? Acha. Now, where are these Oriental luxury products and spices coming from? They are coming from the Eastern world, that is from India and China, right? Therefore, the Europeans found it more and more convenient or more and more necessary to find a new sea route to India to start trading directly with India. Coupled with this was the fact that after Renaissance, the shipping industry of Europe had also grown, and the ships had become quite advanced as compared to the rest of the world. So they were able to undertake long voyages. Their ships were more sturdy, and they could carry large number of men and large quantities of goods. So long distance overseas trade was becoming easier and easier. Now, another feature of the European Dark Age had been that the control of the Catholic Church over daily activities was quite stifling, right? The Catholic Church was in charge not only of disseminating religious instruction but also education. And there had been a few dogmas which had been dominating the Catholic Church. कुछ ऐसे साइंटिफिक फैक्ट्स थे जो कैथलिक चर्च सप्रेस करके रखता था. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, द कैथलिक चर्च preached that the earth is not round, rather it is flat, that the earth is at the center of the universe and the other planets circulate around it, right? So orbit around it, including the sun. Now, because of this, what was happening was that the Europeans had lost their will to explore. Further, the tools of exploration had also been ripped from their hands, because without proper understanding of the world's shape and the navigation that is possible through stars, how would you expect them to explore new worlds, right? Further, because of the religious dogmas which had been created by the Catholic Church, the spirit of adventure had been missing. The Europeans were quite content to live where they resided, to work in the fields that they tilled without having any new aspirations. All of this changed with the coming of the Renaissance. This Renaissance also sparked the spirit of adventure among Europeans. And from the 16th century onwards, from the 15th century onwards, you will find that a number of new geographical discoveries were made by European explorers, such as by Christopher Columbus, such as by Bartholomew Diaz, such as by Vasco da Gama, etc. Right? So the Renaissance played a major role in this entire process. Apart from this, let's see, the Renaissance also led to the emergence of rise of stable monarchies. As a result of the Renaissance, feudalism decreased in Europe. Why? Because trade was increasing and the entire merchant class wanted stable conditions. So they started supporting their king on the promise that he would be able to provide them with peace and security. The rights and privileges of the feudal lords were gradually taken away and they were relegated to the common tier of European society. I'm not going to say common tier, but they were relegated to a station which was lesser than what it had been during the feudal age or the dark age. Now, these stable monarchies did two things. They promoted trade. Why? Because it was a good source of revenue for the state. And second, they also patronized adventurers. Why? Because the promise of new discoveries would held the further promise of greater riches for them. And you know that what were they looking for? Gold, God, and glory, right? So both of these promises would be fulfilled by discovering the new world or rediscovering the old world. Then, as I have already mentioned to you today, the fall of Constantinople also played a major role in the age of discovery, or why the Europeans came to India. Now, where is Constantinople? Constantinople is the old name for Istanbul, right? It straddles two continents, Asia and Europe. It is built on two different sides of the Bosphorus Strait. Bosphorus Strait joins two water bodies, which ones? The Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Now, India and Europe had ancient trading links, but whoever controlled Istanbul controlled the trade between India and Rome, or India and Europe. Why? Because it was at the crossroads of this trade route. If you had to take the land route, you had to go to Istanbul. If you took the sea route from India to the Sinai Peninsula, the power which held the Sinai Peninsula always controlled this trade. And it was invariably that power which controlled Istanbul. Now, 7th century में the Byzantine Empire was created, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks overthrew the Byzantines and conquered Istanbul. The relationship between Islam and Christianity up to this point of time had been very tenuous and very hostile. They had fought each other 4 times in massive crusades. A lot of massacres had happened, and a lot of religious animosity was dominating the entire stage. Further, the Christian church, the Roman Catholic Church, also took a very hostile stance towards Islam. And the fall of Constantinople meant that Islam was knocking on the doors of Europe, because the Istanbul had been the gateway for entry into Europe. Now, what happened as a result of the conquest of Istanbul by the Ottoman Turks? So this had two effects. The threat perception of Christendom increased, right? That means the threat of Islam was felt very close to home. And second, the ancient trade routes between India and Europe were blockaded, right? So as you can see, from the 14th century, or from the 14th century onwards, the demand for Indian goods had been increasing in Europe. But in 1453, the trade routes between India and Europe had been blockaded by the fall of Constantinople, because of the fall of Constantinople. Therefore, the Europeans started searching for a new route to India, right? So this was one reason. And secondly, the threat perceived by the Christian world of Islam at their gates was a huge motivating factor for Christian zealots to try and spread their religion. So this was another motivating factor for the various explorations and discoveries which took place. Now, as I mentioned over here, the second point that I have told you, rise of stable monarchies, they patronized adventurers. So which countries took the lead over here? So there were three countries: Spain, Portugal, and Italy. So all the early discoveries you will find have been made by Spanish, Portuguese, or Italian explorers. And from the 17th century or 16th century onwards, you will find French or British or Dutch explorers coming and finding new lands, right? So these were the important factors, socio-economic and political factors, which led to the arrival of Europeans in India, right? Because of these factors, a new age in Europe started, known as the Age of Discovery, in which the old world was rediscovered and the new world was discovered. When I say old world, I'm talking about the East, India and China primarily. And when I say new world, I mean the Americas, Africa, and Australia. not North Africa, but southern part of Africa, right? So old world is the east and new world is Americas, southern part of Africa and Australia. All right. And a number of adventurers took on voyages to find these new lands. So I hope I have explained myself clearly to you guys. And now what we can do is you can take down whatever I have explained. So I'm going to dictate to you and please write it down. You can tell me if I'm going too fast for you. Okay. So again, the heading you have already given, factors for the arrival of Europeans. Under that, you can write point number 1. Europeans began arriving in India from the end of the 15th century onwards. From the end of the 15th century onwards. Full stop. Their arrival was motivated by a number of socio-political or socio-economic and political factors. By a number of socio-economic and political factors. Next point. You can give the subheading Renaissance. Right. It means rebirth or reawakening. It means rebirth or reawakening. And refers to the rediscovery of the scientific and philosophical knowledge of the classical Greek and Roman civilizations by Europeans towards the end of the 14th century. Towards the end of the 14th century. As a result of contact with Arab traders. Contact with Arab traders. Full stop. Next point. This marked the end. This marked the end of the Dark Ages in Europe. This marked the end of the Dark Ages in Europe. Next point. Numerous scientific discoveries were made. Numerous scientific discoveries were made leading to you can write as subpoints, 3 subpoints. Advances in shipbuilding. Next subpoint, increase in agricultural production. Next subpoint, increase in meat production. Increase in meat production or meat supply. Increase in meat supply. Next main point, as a result Prosperity increased. As a result, prosperity increased, leading to a rise in demand for Oriental luxury. Leading to a rise in demand for Oriental luxury. Full stop. At the same time, the demand for spices also increased for preserving meat. For preserving meat. Full stop. Next point. The Renaissance also transformed the social attitudes of Europe from the insularity of the Dark Age towards the spirit of adventure of the New Age. Right? All right. So next set of factors, you can give the subheading rise of stable monarchies. Rise of stable monarchies. Under this first point, the decline of feudalism led to the rise of stable monarchies. The decline of feudalism led to the rise of stable monarchies, which actively promoted trade and exploration. Which actively promoted trade and exploration. Full stop. Next point. The lead was taken by which powers? The Spanish, Portuguese, and Italians. The lead was taken by the Spanish, Portuguese, and Italians. Right. Next set of factors. Third, fall of Constantinople. You can write the year also in brackets after this, 1453. In 1453, points wise you can write, in 1453, the Ottoman Turks. Ottoman was the name of the dynasty of Turks which conquered Istanbul, right? Its Turkish name is actually Usman, but Europeans were not able to pronounce Usman correctly, so they called it Ottoman, right? In 1453, the Ottoman Turks destroyed the Byzantine Empire, and captured Constantinople. Full stop. Next point. The old trade routes connecting Europe to the east were blockaded full stop. In the rise of, oh, sorry, in the background of rising demand for Eastern goods, comma, the need for discovering new trade routes to India and China inspired Europeans to discover a new route, to discover a new route. Full stop. Next point. The fall of Constantinople represented a cataclysmic event. Cataclysmic means the end of the world, right? Great period of crisis. Represented a cataclysmic event for the entire Christian world. For the entire Christian world. Islam, full stop, Islam was knocking on their doors. Full stop. It was also perceived, it was also perceived as a huge loss of prestige for Christianity. Full stop. Under the influence of the Catholic Church, European monarchs felt duty bound, felt duty bound to spread Christianity, to spread Christianity. And thus, a number of Christian missions were sent overseas, were sent overseas, right? So, last concluding remarks you can write. Due to the combination of these factors, Europe witnessed the age of adventure, the age of adventure, also known as the age of discovery. So you can write age of adventure slash discovery. From the 15th century onwards, from the 15th century onwards. Full stop. A number of adventurers took to the seas, took to the seas. Full stop. The old world, the old world, within bracket you can write Asia, was rediscovered. And the new world, in brackets you may write America, Australia, and Southern Africa, close brackets, were discovered, or was discovered, right? So I hope you will be able to answer the first question, right? Socio-economic and political factors behind the arrival of Europeans in India. ठीक है, so क्या क्या major factors हैं? Gold, God, and glory. What does gold represent? The desire for profits and wealth through trade. God, the desire to spread Christianity, and glory, the desire to regain lost glory as perceived after the fall of Constantinople. Right? But then after that, you will have to expand it further. How the Renaissance played a major part, how the rise of stable monarchies allowed these explorations to take place, and the fall of Constantinople was a cataclysmic event which forced the Europeans to look for a new route towards India, right? So there are both economic factors, social factors, as well as political impetus by the stable monarchies of Europe, right? So that is what you should focus on in the answer. Again, pay attention to the word limit, and for a 15 marker question, you have to write the answer in about 12 minutes, right? So I'm not going to say from the very go you have to limit yourself to 12 minutes or 13 minutes, but gradually you have to write this answer within 12 minutes, so that can allow you to answer all of the questions, right? So one topic we have covered, the factors for arrival. The next we have to see the arrival of Europeans. So one line you can write before I give you the list. Vasco da Gama came to Calicut. Where is Calicut? Present day Kozhikode in Kerala. Vasco da Gama came to Calicut, is in bracket Kozhikode, from Portugal. From Portugal via the Cape of Good Hope. Via the Cape of Good Hope. Right. So, what had Vasco da Gama discovered? बताइए. You can type in your answers and send me. What did Vasco da Gama discover? A new sea route to India. Very good. You hit the nail right on its head. So what usually students answer is that he discovered India, but then trade between India and Europe had existed from the post-Mauryan period onwards. So the Europeans already knew about the existence of India, right? Then usually what students say, that he discovered the sea route to India, but India had always traded through the sea route. Trade between India and the Arabs was mostly conducted on this sea, right? The correct answer is that he discovered an all sea route to India. What he had done was that he had bypassed the Ottoman influence and the Arabs by coming to the southern tip of Africa, rounding that cape and coming to India, right? So this is the import of this first statement. So you can write, he had discovered, after this first statement, you can write, he had discovered an all sea route to India. After him, full stop, after him, other Europeans followed suit. Other Europeans followed suit. And now what you can do is you can make a table with 4 columns. Right. And over here, you can give the headings: who, where, when, and first factory. Or rather, what you should do is the second column should be when, and then it should be where. Right? Who, when, where, and first factory. So there were five European powers which came to India beginning from 1498. The first to arrive were the Portuguese, followed by the Dutch, followed by the British, the Danes from Denmark, and the French. The first European power to arrive in India, the Portuguese. The last to arrive in India, the French. UPSC might ask you a very simple question. You have to arrange these European powers in order of their arrival. So it is important to remember the order in which they arrived. A less probable question is going to be about the year. UPSC usually does not focus upon years of their arrival, but since we are discussing this topic in detail, I'm going to give you these years. The Portuguese came to India, you already know, in 1498. First Portuguese to come to India, Vasco da Gama. The Dutch arrived in India in 1596. The British in 1608. The Danes in 1618, and the French in 1667. Where did they arrive in India first? So the Portuguese arrived at Calicut in Kerala, Kozhikode, and the other powers made their first landfall at Surat. Now, these powers established their factories in India. A factory back then did not mean a place where goods were manufactured. Rather, it meant a place where goods are stored and traded. So you can think of it as a go down come showroom. Okay. So the Portuguese established their first factory at Cochin in 1503. The Dutch established their first factory at Masulipatam in 1605. The British also established their first factory at Masulipatam in 1605. Sorry, the British established their factory at Masulipatam in 1611. Right. The Danes established their first factory at Trankebar. This is in Tamil Nadu in 1620. And the French established their first factory at Surat in 1668. Right. So this is the order of arrival of Europeans. So without consulting the table, tell me who were the first Europeans to establish a factory in on the eastern coast of India. No, not the Portuguese. Portuguese established their factory at Cochin. It is on the western coast of India, right? So it was the Dutch. It was the Dutch. They established their factory at Masulipatam, which is in Andhra Pradesh, right? So be aware of questions such as this also. You already have the knowledge, but you have to take a moment to think about the question. There are going to be a number of questions which are going to be related to both history as well as geography. For example, you might be asked to arrange the first factories from north to south. So if you don't know the map of India, you will not be able to answer that question. तो आपकी जितनी नॉलेज है कि पहले ब्रिटिश आए थे या पहले डेन्स आए थे, वो सब बेकार हो जाएगी, राइट? सो टेक नोट ऑफ सच क्वेश्चंस. ट्राई टू एंटिसिपेट क्वेश्चंस किस तरह से आते हैं, किस तरह के आते हैं. लुक एट द प्रीवियस ईयर्स क्वेश्चन पेपर्स सो दैट यू हैव अ बेटर अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ व्हाट द यूपीएससी एक्सपेक्ट्स फ्रॉम यू एज कैंडिडेट्स. ठीक है, राइट? Now give the next heading. So we have discussed two things over here, right? And next we have to discuss the Portuguese in India, their policies, struggle against the Arabs. So give the next heading, the Portuguese in India. Right. So one thing we already know, that Vasco da Gama was the first Portuguese sailor to arrive in India. He came to India with 3 ships. When he arrived at Calicut, the Zamorin of Calicut, that is the king of Calicut, welcomed him cordially and allowed him to trade in spices. He took back 3 shiploads of pepper and earned a profit margin of 60 times, right? So a huge profit margin. And this inspired a number of Portuguese sailors to come to India after him because they were inspired by his fabulous wealth. The next Portuguese sailor to arrive in India was Pedro Alvarez Cabral. Now, he had a different mindset than Vasco da Gama. He came with the ambition of displacing the Arabs from Indian Ocean trade. He wanted to create a monopoly on Indian Ocean trade, and this brought him into conflict with the Arabs. After this, when he returned, Vasco da Gama again came back to India in 1503. Through a treaty with the Zamorin, he was allowed to establish a factory at Cochin, where the initial Portuguese headquarters was established. Right. So these first 3 dates that you are seeing relates to that. So you can write these dates: 1498, 1498. Vasco da Gama was welcomed by the Zamorin. Zamorin probably comes from the word Samutrin, which means sea lord, right? So it was the name for the king. Was welcomed by the Zamorin, who allowed him to trade in spices, full stop. He returned to Portugal with 3 shiploads of pepper, making a huge profit margin of over 60 times. Right. Next date you can write 1500. Pedro Alvarez Cabral was also welcomed by the Zamorin, but he tried to force the Zamorin. He tried to force the Zamorin to expel Arab merchants. To expel Arab merchants from Calicut. This brought him. This brought him into conflict with the Arabs. With the Arabs. And last date you can write 1503. Vasco da Gama returned and was able to persuade the Zamorin to allow him to establish a factory at Cochin, which served as the early headquarters of the Portuguese in India. Early headquarters of the Portuguese in India. Right? Acha. Now you can give the heading Estado da India. Estado da India. What does this mean? It is Portuguese for the Portuguese state of India. The Portuguese state of India. So from the very beginning, the Portuguese had political ambitions in India, as evinced by the establishment of an entity known as the Estado da India or Portuguese State of India. This does not mean the Portuguese East India Company, right? All the other European powers initially came to India only as traders. They did not have any political or territorial ambitions. The Portuguese, on the other hand, had imperial ambitions in India from the very beginning. You can write the next subheading you can give objectives. Objectives under Estado de India, you can mention objectives. So what were the objectives of this Portuguese state in India? You can write first to govern Portuguese settlements in the east. To govern Portuguese settlements in the east. Second, to create a Portuguese Christian empire in the east. Third, to launch a holy war against Islam. And fourth, to create a Portuguese monopoly by displacing the Arabs. right? So this means that the Portuguese had arrived in India with a clear vision of not only dominating Indian Ocean's trade, but also creating a Christian Portuguese empire in the East, headquartered in India, which would be able to govern Portuguese settlements and wage a holy war against Islam with India as their base. Right. So these were the objectives. Now, what the Portuguese government did was that it appointed a number of governors or governor generals for the Portuguese settlements in India. So, one by one, the first three over here are going to be important. After that, they are not very important, right? So, you can write down the first Portuguese governor in India was Francisco de Almeida. Francisco de Almeida. Now, what did he do? He introduced the blue water policy. What do you understand by this blue water policy? It means that when a power is disproportionately strong on the seas as compared to its power on land, this means that there is an asymmetrical focus towards the development of naval power, and the focus is towards dominating the sea routes and sea navigation rather than creating control over land resources. Is this correct? Is this clear? So the Portuguese realized that they were superior in terms of their naval expertise rather than in terms of their territorial armies as compared to the Indian and Arabic forces. So they wanted to use this superiority in order to dominate Indian Ocean trade. And because the trade of India depended on oceanic trade, they wanted to force Indian powers to accept their terms. And thus, this blue water policy was introduced. So, how was this blue water policy to be given effect? So, if you look at the Indian Ocean, there are a number of choke points, right? Where if any single power is able to control that choke point, it will be able to control the trade of the interior. For example, if you look at the Persian Gulf, you will find a place known as the uh, Hormuz Strait. If you look at the Red Sea, you will find the Gulf of Aden. If you look at the eastern coast of Africa, there is a narrow strait between Madagascar and Mozambique. If you look at Indonesia and the Malay Peninsula, the trade route goes through a very narrow strait known as the Straits of Malacca. Right? And the Portuguese modus operandi was not to conquer large parcels of territory in India, but to control these choke points so that they could dominate the trade and displace the Arabs, thus giving them the wherewithal to launch a holy war against Islam. Right? So this is the blue water policy. You can write this down in one line. He introduced the blue water policy, which envisioned naval dominance naval dominance and control of important choke points important choke points in the Indian Ocean, rather than conquering large parcels of territory right? So in pursuance of this policy, Almeida fought two battles. In 1508, he fought the Battle of Dabul, and in 1509, he fought the Battle of Diu. Right. Now, the Battle of Dabul and Diu were waged against the combined navies of the Sultan of Gujarat, Sultan of Egypt, and the Zamorin of Calicut. In the first battle, the Portuguese lost, but in the second battle, they were able to destroy the combined navies of these three Eastern powers. So the Portuguese won. Is this clear? So these are the important events and policy initiatives of Francisco de Almeida. Next Governor General, you can write Alfonso de Albuquerque. Alfonso de Albuquerque. Now this fellow is known as the real founder, of Portuguese power, the real founder of Portuguese power in the East. Why? Because he was able to give effect to the blue water policy. The vision of Almeida was fulfilled by Albuquerque. So you can write next point that he conquered strategic choke points in the Indian Ocean, such as Hormuz, Aden, Mombasa, Zanzibar, and the Straits of Malacca, etc. Thus establishing Portuguese dominance over Indian Ocean trade. Full stop. Next point, he also captured Goa in 1510 by defeating the Adil Shahis of Bijapur. Right. So till now, Goa had been an important port of the Deccani kingdom of Bijapur, ruled by the Adil Shahi dynasty. Now, the Deccani Muslim states such as Bijapur, Golconda, Ahmednagar, etc., they always had a very hostile relationship with the kingdom of Vijayanagar, with the Vijayanagar Empire. And a major port of or major bone of contention between these two empires was the port of Goa. Why? Because it was the entry port for all trade with the Arabic world, with for all trade with the West. So for almost 200 years, these Bahmani kingdoms or the divided Bahmani kingdoms and the state of Bijapur had been fighting with each other. The main item of import for these Deccani states was horses from Arabia. Now, Indian horses were not of a very good quality or of a very good breed. They were not suitable for warfare. And the nature of medieval warfare was such that it was heavily dependent on cavalry. Therefore, whoever controlled Goa had an upper hand in their battles, right? And what happened after the Portuguese captured Goa? One, the Bahmani kingdom suffered, or the divided Bahmani kingdom suffered, because there was no direct supply of horses. Further, they lost out even more because Albuquerque entered into an agreement with Krishnadev Raya of Vijayanagar for a regular supply of good quality Arab horses. Right. So after this point, you can write he also entered. He also entered into an agreement with Krishna Dev Raya of Vijayanagar for regular supply of horses. For regular supply of horses. So in this manner, Vijayanagar and the Portuguese became allies of sorts, at least for a short period of time. Right. Next point you can write. He encouraged Portuguese sailors to marry Indian women. So why did he do this? Because he wanted to increase the number of Christian and Portuguese settlers in India. And if he was able to inspire his sailors to settle in India, to set down their roots in India, the Portuguese state of India would have a solid foundation, right? So it was more of a strategic action that he had taken rather than a social policy which he encouraged, right? So you can write after putting a full stop, this was motivated by his desire to build and expand a Christian base for the Portuguese state. For the Portuguese state. Next point, he also abolished sati. He also abolished the practice of sati from Portuguese settlements in India. From Portuguese settlements in India. Again, this was not the result of any desire to bring social reform. Rather, he thought that if widows are not forced to kill themselves, or if they are not killed off after the death of their husbands, the Portuguese men could remarry them, right? And that was his objective over here. All right, so these are the important policies and activities undertaken by Albuquerque. Next Portuguese governor Nino de Cunha. So only one major contribution. He shifted the Portuguese headquarters from from Cochin to Goa. From Cochin to Goa. Right. So these are a few details about the Portuguese governors. Right. Three governors we have talked about: Almeida, Albuquerque, and Nino de Cunha. If the question is asked who introduced the blue water policy, the answer would be, batao. The Portuguese governor to introduce the blue water policy was Almeida. All right. And who gave effect or who fulfilled the blue water policy? Albuquerque. Very good. All right. So I hope this much is clear and there is no confusion regarding the contribution of the Portuguese governors. Now, as we had discussed, we are also going to be discussing the various policies of the Portuguese in India. So one very important piece of history is that they introduced something known as the Cartas system. So what is this Cartas system? This is a system of passes and permits. Now, as we have seen that in a very short period of less than 20 years, the Portuguese had become the masters of Indian Ocean trade. They had completely displaced the Arabs, and the other merchants who were plying the Indian Ocean sea routes were completely dependent on the pleasure of the Portuguese. Now, what the Portuguese did not do was to focus on expanding their own trade in the Indian Ocean and the Indo-European trade. Rather, they tried to act as self-appointed policemen. And what they started doing was they wanted to earn revenue by giving passes or permits to those merchants who were still trading in the Indian Ocean. And without these passes, no other merchant would be allowed to trade. If upon demand, the merchant is not able to produce this cartas, his goods would be seized, his ship would be sunk, and his crew would be imprisoned. Right. So this is the kind of activity that the Portuguese engaged themselves in. So you can write down under this Carta system. It was a system of passes and permits. It was a system of passes and permits introduced by the Portuguese introduced by the Portuguese in order to extract money from traders in the Indian Ocean. From traders in the Indian Ocean. Full stop. Next point. These passes, known as cartas, were issued by the Portuguese to other traders in exchange for money. Full stop. Thus, rather than focusing upon expanding their own trade, expanding their own trade, comma, the Portuguese indulged in rent seeking, indulged in rent seeking. Right. So this is the kata system. I hope it is clear. And you can write one more line after engaged in rent seeking, full stop. And in the same point, you can write thus they acted as the self-appointed policemen of the Indian Ocean. The self-appointed policemen of the Indian Ocean. Right? Okay, so this was the kata system. Next, you can write, give the heading piracy. Again, the Portuguese were not only acting as policemen, they were also acting as the gundas of the Indian Ocean. So they were acting exactly like Mumbai ka Don, right? And what does Mumbai ka Don ask for? Ki bhai ko hafta chahiye. And what were the Portuguese asking for? They were asking for money. And if money was not given, then the ships would be sunk and all the goods would be seized. Additionally, in the exact fashion of a Mumbai ka Don, they also engaged in piracy. That is absolutely illegal activities. So you can write under this, you can give the subheading piracy. The Portuguese used their naval superiority to raid इनके दो टारगेट्स होते थे, एक तो मर्चेंट्स होते थे और दूसरे बताओ कौन होते होंगे? Those people who were traveling from India to Mecca in order to perform Hajj. Because you remember one of the objectives of the Portuguese in India was to conduct a holy war, right? So what have you written? They engaged in piracy. क्या लिखा है? I don't remember क्या मैंने dictate किया था. They use their naval superiority. Thank you. They use their naval superiority to raid not only traders but also Muslim pilgrims, performing Hajj, right? So another point you can write under this, they used, full stop, they used Hooghly as a base for piracy, in the Bay of Bengal. Right. So along with kata system, they also engaged in piracy. Next subheading you can give religious policy. So one of their objectives was to wage holy war against Islam. And one of the reasons why they had come to India was to spread Christianity. Now this Christianity was spread not only through peaceful means by Christian missionaries, but also by force. So at the same time they were waging a holy war against Islam, they were also indulging in forcible conversions and practices such as destruction of Indian temples and disruption of pilgrimage, forcibly converting the prisoners of war, etc. So they took a very narrow-minded approach towards religion. So you can write this. The Portuguese adopted a bigoted religious policy, a bigoted religious policy, a bigoted religious policy, and engaged in practices such as forcible conversions, forcible conversions, destruction of Hindu temples, destruction of Hindu temples, and disruption of disruption of Hajj pilgrimage, disruption of Hajj pilgrimage. Right. So this is sufficient to know about the Portuguese in India. You have seen their early settlers or early adventurers who came to India, such as Vasco da Gama and Pedro Alvarez Cabral, the Portuguese state in India, its objectives and governors, along with its religious and economic policies. Right. You also know about their imperial vision in India and the way they wanted to create their empire, not by developing their land army, but by taking advantage of their naval superiority to dominate the Indian Ocean trade. Right. So I'm going to end the class today क्योंकि आप लोगों की 12 बजे से दूसरी क्लास भी है, and from tomorrow onwards we are going to continue with this same topic, right? And then after that we are going to look at different topics. So ठीक है, I'm going to end the class now, and I'm going to ask if you guys have any doubts so that I can address them. किसी को अगर कोई doubts हैं, so you can ask me. How do we use the NCERT for history? देखो, I would suggest that you read the NCERT at least 3 times before you attempt the examination next year. I believe that you're going to attempt the examination, appear for the examination next year. So the first reading, you do not have any pen in your hand. You simply go through the entire text and keep the important things which appear important to you. After that, what you have to do is go look at the previous year's question papers, both the prelims and the mains. Now, this will give you an idea of what kind of questions the UPSC expects from you. And in your second reading, you are going to sit with a highlighter or a pen, and you are going to underline the salient features that you think are relevant from the perspective of the examination. ठीक है. अच्छा, in the third reading, what you should be doing is that you should be making notes and noting down the important aspects which you feel you will need to remember later on, because when you are revising for the examination, you will have very little time to refer to the NCERT textbooks again and again, right? So you don't want to be turning pages in the last 15 days before the examination. So you have all the important information in about 30 or 40 pages for every subject that you are reading. If you're talking about history, if you're talking about geography, economy, polity, anything, right? तो आपके पास इस तरह के synoptic notes होने चाहिए. Class notes are going to be helpful, but only up to a certain degree, because what we are doing over here is that we are dictating you notes. And why I am dictating notes and not giving you pre-prepared notes, uska bhi ek reason hai, because there is something known as active learning. If you are sitting in the classroom and taking down notes, all your senses are focused upon learning this information. What happens if you are only listening and not writing is that your muscles do not have the memory of taking down that note. You only have the memory of having heard the lecture and looked at the notes once. What happens with most of the students is that they do not go back and revise the notes that they have taken down the very same day. And that is a big mistake. So what you should be doing is you should be covering not only the NCERT with the strategy that I have told you, these 3 readings. First reading is going to be a bare reading. Second reading, after the you have looked at the previous year's questions and you are sitting with a pen to underline the important things. And third reading, where you take synoptic notes. But for the classes that you are attending, the notes that you are taking, they should be revised every day. And at the end of the week, you have 2 days break, right? So you should be revising whatever you have done throughout the week. And as the syllabus progresses, you will have more and more to revise. So every month, I would say you should revise whatever you have taken down in the class notes. And also you should be uh, having this thought in your mind that you also have to revise and repeat whatever you have written down from your NCRT notes or whatever you have read in the NCRT. There might be some facts that you might want to revise. There might be some context that you might want to refamiliarize yourself with. So it is going to be a constant process of repetition and revision, so that when the time for the examination comes, you do not have any problems recalling. Okay. So that is the strategy for reading the NCRT and how to approach the class notes. Right. Apart from that, if anybody has a question. नहीं, तो आज हमने एक क्वेश्चन को, मीन्स क्वेश्चन को डिस्कस किया है. आई एक्सपेक्ट दैट दोज पीपल हु आर अटेंडिंग these classes regularly, you will write this questions answer and send it to me on the WhatsApp group, so that we can discuss where you are going right and where you need to improve, right? So again, एक ही क्वेश्चन है. The word limit is 250 words and the target time that you have to write it in is around 12 minutes. So try to write it in 12 minutes. नहीं होता है, so don't bother too much about it. Try writing quality answers with precision. That is going to be very important for you. ठीक है, तो चलिए, I'm going to end the class right now and I'll see you tomorrow the same time. All right. Thank you guys.